Folks, welcome back to the show. We got a special treat for you. I want to introduce you to Don Dancer. He is a professional debate coach, and he lives right here in Arkansas, lives in Northwest Arkansas. He's been doing this for decades. Don, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, first off, tell me, how does somebody become a debate coach? And, how did you fall into this?
Well, I started in college, and, I sort of was recruited by a professor, and I really didn't want to get involved. However, I needed some money, and he offered me a scholarship, and then that's what got it started. And then I'd never been exposed to debate, which I think is one of the great flaws in our academic system. It's not pushed. And if you look back to history and philosophy, they'll emphasize the fact that if you're going to have a free society, I hate to use the term democracy, but a democratic society, you have to teach debate because individuals have to know how to analyze information because the history behind it is that's why all of this test of logic and reason were put together was because, elites, the intelligentsia, the power brokers of any generation influenced and manipulated people. And so Socrates and Plato and all those guys were trying to teach us how to not be manipulated. And so one of the things I throw out with my classes in the beginning is the allegory of Plato's Cave and how we're just sort of viewing projections by other people, and that's not reality. That's the reality they cast upon us.
Yeah.
And so his whole idea is there, and subsequent debate and logicians is that you can't just follow what's projected on you. You become a victim, and so you have to be like what Descartes calls I think, therefore I am. You have to know how to think. Mm-hmm. And we don't teach kids how to think anymore. So I got involved in it in college, and then I fell in love with it because it challenged me to think like nothing else before, and it taught me how to, analyze information in a way that nobody had ever explained to me.
We're talking with Don Dancer, a professional debate coach. That's fascinating. I want to. There's so much to unpack there in the statement that you just made. Yeah. First of all, when it comes to Plato's Cave, sometimes it can be hard to when you try to go back to the other, the people that are still in bondage and be like, hey, there's a whole other world. Sometimes they just don't even want to listen. They don't want to be free sometimes. And also address that, but also address this, Don, the fact that you said I hate to say the word or use the word democracy. Why is that?
Well, I think that term, as with a lot of terms now, has been sort of tainted. And so, there are multiple definitions of the term as people understand it. It's not universally understood as being the same thing. For example, a Marxist would see democracy as a socialist society, and that's a collectivist society, and individual liberty and collectivism is a contradiction. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole idea there is everybody has to be on board, and so that becomes the power mechanism. And so if you try to get out of the cave, then then you're the loony, or the person fighting the system, and you have to be dealt with, And so debate, if it is anything, it's fighting against collectivism, collectivist ideas, and, we would preach that most of the atrocities that have been linked to various other times throughout human history are actually from collectivism. Like Don Dancer as an individual can only affect a few people if he goes crazy. But Adolf Hitler, with a collective identity, a collective state, can massacre millions.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point.
yeah, getting out of the cave, I think, is so hard now. It's interesting that allegory was 2,400 years ago, but I think it's more relevant now than ever because of the power of the information apparatus. You've got the phones and in people's faces constantly, social media, the news media, the movies, the music, everything is propagandized. And so, when you have everybody saying the same thing, it's really hard for someone to say, hey, wait a minute. This is kind of a contradiction, guys. I mean, we've got, for example, people blowing up about, Trump and sexism, but we live in a country saturated with pornography.
Yeah.
And feminists never say anything about that,
mm-hmm.
which is the most, repugnant thing that a woman can endure, I would think. And yet, have you ever seen a feminist protest pornography? Not once in my lifetime.
Yeah, not that I can remember. Matter of fact, I can't remember who, but somebody wrote a piece about Hollywood and entertainment in general, and said that it's kind of ironic that they're so outraged that the rest of the country isn't outraged at, when the president tweets that or when the president says that. And he says the reason is because Hollywood has done everything they can to push the envelope further, to contribute to a moral decline. And, this guy was just kind of remarking how ironic it is that they're now outraged, that we're not outraged,
But see, as a debater, everything like that happens for a reason. I mean, it's not like that's a small entity. It's a huge part of society that's controlled. And so why is that? I mean, were they trying to deconstruct discipline created by, prior generations and deconstruct the family and now reconstruct a collectivist idea or a Marxist idea on a society because that wouldn't work in the beginning? I mean, and so the contradiction with feminism, that's a heck of a contradiction. I mean, these guys are marching with Islamists and saying they advocate for, protection of women. And so that's a contradiction. You have to look back and go, all right, so let's analyze it.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? So are they really who they say they are? Is this really about feminism, or is this a mask? Because ultimately, tests of reason and logic are about removing masks, peeling back the onions, hiding what's underneath. And so what is underneath that? I mean, if they were truly liberal, they would do what they do with us and say, well, you have to reject the fantasy of religion, and so stick with logic and science. But in this case, they're aligning themselves with other religions that are much more radical. And so who are these people? Are they trying to really enforce science, logic, and reason, or are they aligning themselves with, our enemies?
It's a very good point. A very good question that you're raising. Again, we're talking.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on there? I'm not saying that's what's going on there, but I mean, that's not like a mistake. They didn't slip on some ice and fall into Islam.
Yeah.
These are purposeful things, So then you got to step back and look at that whole situation and see what's going on with the whole community.
So we're talking again, folks, with Don Dancer. He lives in Northwest Arkansas. He's a professional debate coach. He's been on the debate circuit. I read here, for 30 years debating on the college and pro debate circuit. I gotta imagine, doing this at the collegiate level, Don, that you've had some run-ins with, history teachers. You seem to be a knowledgeable person of history. What are our kids being taught, and does that have something to do with the fact that we have more and more people that appear to not be able to think critically?
There's a lot going on. I wouldn't lay it on the doorstep of history teachers. I've analyzed, what's going on there. And by the way, I want to say, I talk about the left, but there's contradictions on the right too. And so I don't want to get into this idea that I'm pushing one side or the other. But let me get back to the teaching thing there. It seems to be there's several really large issues that's going on with the classroom and maybe history, but one is a lot of it's ideologically driven, and so you see a lot of mistakes being made, I would argue, logically. And so I'll give you a couple of examples here. So my own daughter comes home, and she basically is talking to me about our getting involved in World War II, and then she basically comes out and says that it had been explained to her that Japan attacked us for a reason, and we were actually the cause of that. So we had an oil embargo, and we were, influencing a hegemonic power on Japan. However, she didn't know the reason for that. And the reason for that was they had invaded China and, had a lot of atrocities there. She didn't know that we had Americans signing up to fight there for the defense of China, right? And so the positive for the United States was left out, And then one of my favorite stories about this, I was judging a speech competition, and this young man who was actually, you could tell he was a brilliant kid, he gets up and gives a speech about why the United States should reject our current form of government and adopt the form of government of the Khmer Rouge and the People's Republic of Cambodia.
Huh.
And so, this is a 15, 16, 17-year-old student, high school student, and I'm 53, so I'm my chin's on the floor. And so, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Okay. And so,
hang on, we lost you just for a second, so I think that's why you were. That's what you're thinking.
Someone's calling me on my.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. So your chin's on the floor. Don, are you there? Can you hear me, sir?
I'm there. I'm waiting for that to end. Anyway, and so after the speech, the student sits down, and typically I don't get involved. I just critique the speech, but this was such a horrific situation. And so I asked the young man where he got his information, and he said, well, my AP government class. And I said, well, to the students there, I go, get your phones out, and I want you to Google Khmer Rouge and Cambodia. And then I said, I want you to hit images. And so they do that, and their faces sort of, go into shock. And the kid looks at me, and he goes, what is that? And I go, that's the Khmer Rouge. And so for me, there's a lot of ideology impacting what's being taught.
Seems like you're describing a manipulation. It seems like our young people are being manipulated. And let me ask you this: play devil's advocate. Was that ever not the case, or
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's the whole point of the cave, right? Even in the classroom, you're in the cave. And so I don't know if that's ever the case, but that's a heck of a a heck of a omission, right? To not even mention the killing fields and to talk about the Khmer Rouge.
Right. Their government's Cambodia's government's fantastic, except when it's not, and this happens.
Yeah. And I think that's also it leads to another issue with how things are taught and even discussed in our society. It's sort of this myopic view. And what I mean by that is that things are seen through the scope and prism of, well, it's a United States issue. But most of these issues, like slavery, are not only were not American issues, but they were global issues. And not only did they exist during colonialism, but they go all the way back to Mesopotamia. I mean, and so it's a vastly human issue. It's not an American issue. It's a planetary. I mean, it's a Earth issue. It's a humanity issue.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you'll hear people say, "Well, America has a problem with this," or "America has a problem with that." Well, whatever, I've traveled the globe. I was in the military, and typically whatever you find here is worse than other places. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I'm not defending what bad happened here, but I'm just saying, like, when you take a myopic perspective, you can demonize a culture and a society unfairly.
Don, do you think there's any, and we're running out of time here, and I'd love to talk again, by the way.
Yeah.
But do you think there's any, I mean, there's definitely hope out there, right? I think there's the next generation, they're calling it Generation Z. And so there's the Generation X, the Millennials, and now this Generation Z. They seem to be, from what I've read, kind of making freedom of expression and freedom of speech and critical thought the counterculture again. Are you noticing that? Have you heard that from anyone?
I would. I don't know if I see that in action. There might be some articles written on it, but I see a lot of radicalism. And so a couple of things I want to say, just to add some value to the discussion for people, is one thing that debate teaches is that everything has its good and bad, and then you have an objective assessment, an objective middle. And so one of the reasons we need debate in schools is to analyze that and teach kids to see the pros and cons and assess the pros and cons based on the situation. Without that, then you end up with these radical zealots on the different extremes.
Yeah.
And so that should be taught. And then I have a couple of my favorite tests. Okay, so I thought I would throw that out there so that people would learn from the situation. So one of my favorites is the test of exclusion. And so basically we have a lot of things that are claimed to be causal links to something. But if you remove that and it still exists, then that's not the cause. So we'll hear arguments made that capitalism causes poverty. And so, all right, let's assume that's true. Let's look at non-capitalist societies like North Korea or Venezuela. Do you find poverty there? Well, yeah. Well, you find more poverty. So obviously, the cause is not capitalism. The cause is, it's humanity and how we function, or
something else. Something else.
Yeah, something else.
Try another hypothesis. I like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then contradictions. I love contradictions. So I talked earlier about feminism in a country with pornography, saturated with pornography. That's a huge contradiction, claiming to be science and then denying biology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when that happens, as a debater, that's not about. You're no longer valid, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So now,
but the
cast that aside.
Yeah, and I like that. Those are all tools that people need to hear, because right now they're not using them, and when they get pointed out that they are contradictory, they're now just wanting to go all Marxist and silence the opposition and turn violent in some cases. So
this is the mindset of collectivism. You have to understand that becomes so entrenched that whenever you contradict the intelligentsia, and that's the idea. You've got these brilliant people that understand everything, and we don't have rights or wrongs or concretes, but we're just going to listen to these people, and they're going to tell us the right thing to do, because they're college professors or, whatever, they've done the research. And then you start noticing these contradictions. So, for example, I'm just kind of drawing out of the ether here, but So homosexuals can't change, how they function, but every other sexuality is fluid. And then it's not your biology doesn't determine your sexuality, and your cognitive doesn't determine your sexuality. It's your spirit. So now the left is into spirituality, and so God is now pre-programming people prior to birth, and that can't be changed.
Right, but then there's also an atheism. Yeah, God doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
contradiction, dude. And then people just like ingest that, and then when you bring it up, it's like you're the bad guy.
Yeah, you're the bad guy because you're trying to get people to come in full circle. You're trying to tell people to stop staring at a cave wall, looking at shadows, and instead come out of the cave with me. Yeah, I love it, Don Dancer. I appreciate it. I want to have you on again soon, and I really do. I appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
Hey, listen, loved it, and anytime.
All righty. Thank you. Appreciate it, Don.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back in just a moment, folks.